Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith, and welcome to Office Hours. Today we're talking about Pegasus Knights. I would respond to comments, but most of the comments I'm going to respond to are just going to come into a very simple subset called People think that Pegasus Knights are very good at combat just like Wyverns and only slightly worse. And so I think a traditional tier list might be the perfect response to that. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. We have a lot of units to talk about. First up, FE11, Shadow Dragon, Wing Spear, Ceda, is a tier of her own because she doesn't require investment. She just out of the box. Her stats don't even really matter. She has good speed, good luck, that, for sure. What matters is the Wing Spear, the fact that you can forge it, up to plus 15 might, that you have enough gold to be able to do so, or at least get like a plus 12 or plus 13, and you can buy more later and make a second one that's even more powerful if you need it. And also the fact that the majority of enemies that you actually care about in Shadow Dragon are Armor Knights or Cavaliers. Wing Spear Ceda is definitely a tier of her own. She is one of like 3 ways to beat the game on hard 5 that are like pretty easy and brain dead. It's either Wing Spear Ceda, Wolf and or Sedgar General Max Defense Tank, or Warp Staff, which can be combined with either of those. So, one of the easiest ways to beat hard 5, basically a delete button, basically a cheat, feels like you're abusing a bug, even though it's not a bug, it's a feature. Definitely top on the list here. Also note, I did not include any 3 Houses units because none of them are canonically Pegasus Knights in player hands, and while I could have included Ingrid as because she's a Pegasus Knight and Falcon Knight on auto-promotion in other routes, or in other classes, or when you fight her, I didn't feel like it. So I didn't. Tough, it's my tier list. Next tier is Carry in Training. These are the Pegasus Knights that are very good at combat, and that make very good use of experience when you give it to them. They're units that are up there among the top combat units in their games, respectively, or at least can be easily made into such. Easily, varying based on definition. So, FE9, Marcia, FE12, Pala, the Gaiden, Pegasus Knights, particularly Pala and Katria. I like Ests as well, but I put her lower for different reasons, which I'll get to. The SOV ones, which I say are a little bit worse than the Gaiden ones, because Falcon Knights got nerfed quite hard in SOV compared to Gaiden, but the extra weapons they have access to and weapon arts and whatnot help make up for that a little bit. Vanessa in Sacred Stones is probably the weakest at base here, the one that most needs training, and I debated just putting her up in at the top of Worthy Investment, but I think because of how that game allows you to snowball units, Vanessa is a perfect choice to be your early snowball. Generally, it's either going to be her or it's going to be Franz, and some people, if you have good growth luck, can make it like Ross or something as your early snowball, but that's beside the point. Needless to say, she comes in at the perfect time to be that snowball unit if you choose to make her one. So yeah, these are your carries in training. These are your good units that if you invest your resources into them, you will get back tenfold if they are not good at base in general, like particularly FE12 and FE3 Book 2, but particularly FE12 Pala, is one of those units that makes FE12 Lunatic Mode possible. Worthy Investment are units that generally they start a little bit weaker. They're not bad, but they can struggle a little bit more early on, or they take longer time to get going, or they don't have as big of a ceiling above other units. They're not generally considered the best units in their game by a solid margin like Carry in Training might be. Here you have, so quick note, the tier list I'm using doesn't have sprites for FE3 Book 1 Pala and Catria, even though it has the FE3 Book 1 sprites for most other units, but it does have their Book 2 sprites, so that's where they are. So, yeah, FE3 Book 2 Catria, Fee in FE4. I will say Fee does depend on what her inheritance is, who the father is, and whatnot. But she is so much better than Ermina. It's not even funny, and I will get to that when we talk about Ermina. Name is blanking on me. FE8, Tana. Often gets attacked quite harshly and rated quite poorly by the community because she comes several chapters after Vanessa does, and most people who are using Vanessa have basically super invested into her during the Erica training arc, basically. And because Tana misses all of the Erica training arc, she's derided as quite bad. Even though she is still a very solid unit potentially, she just doesn't have that those extra legs under her to start, so she does need to start from that frail Pegasus Knight beginning, and has more direct competition in terms of Cormag joining around a similar time frame depending on route and whatnot. I still say she is a worthy investment, and she can be just as good of a combat god as Vanessa can be in that game, though does take a little bit more concerted effort or more trips to Volney, as it were. This is FE12 Catria. Catria, while she joins in the middle of the game in FE1, FE3 Book 2, or FE3 Book 1, and Shadow Dragon, she comes in Chapter 2 in FE3 Book 2 and FE12. So she basically is your early Pegasus Knight there. She's not as good as Pala, but still quite good, has good growths, has passable bases, particularly her speed. Just pretty solid unit all around, although Pala's extra bases, particularly in FE12, make a large difference. I would actually argue bringing FE3 Book 2 Pala down just a little bit also to worthy investment. Either that or bringing Catria up to carry in training, but they're both very good. I definitely think that they probably deserve being... They're similar. Pala is better, but they are still similar. Then you have the Awakening Pegasus Knights. Awakening, I have a hard time rating most units as anything but a worthy investment, unless they are completely broken, like Robin, or arguably Frederick, depending on how you view that game and that game's difficulty curve. But these units are just good. You can loop them infinitely if you have the time. They provide good stats, pretty good combat once they have a few levels in them. Good utility as backpacks for mobility, or, they still can fly other units around. So, all in all, quite good units. Keldori I put as worthy investment, again, because child units are just generally better. Because if you're planning on using a child unit, you've probably picked out a good parent pairing for skill inheritance and whatnot, or stats or whatnot. And so Keldori has a lot of opportunity to just be a flat-out better unit than Tsubaki in either of the routes that she's playable in. Chloe in Engage is just a very solid unit. She has good speed and decent enough strength. The strength is very much helped by promoting to Wyvern, whereas promoting to Griffin allows her to use... And is Griffin in that game? Yeah, that allows her to use staves, which are okay. Generally, I would recommend going through Wyvern at least once to increase that strength, and then maybe settling into Griffin towards the late game when you might want the extra staff utility. But either way, very solid unit, just needs a little bit of strength help generally, but has the speed, whereas a lot of units in Engage have the strength but need a little bit of speed help, and so she can make use of the strength increasing things and doesn't need the speed increasing things, so they can go to someone else if you're using her. Pretty good unit in terms of filling out your army that way. I also have Path of Radiance Tanith. She's mostly here because she joined so much later than Marcia or Jill, but is still a solid flyer. Bulky like everything is in Path of Radiance. Still decent combat, even if she's not incredible. Does still take some leveling and whatnot. Very interesting because of her Reinforce ability. I think that makes a lot of players either actively not want to use her at all because they hate dealing with yellow units, or actively choose to use her because she's one of the few units that brings a totally unique utility with her in that game. Then you have FE1 and FE3 Book 1, Ceda. They're here and worthy investment just barely. In fact, I would probably put them down a little bit like that. Because their strength growth, particularly FE3 Book 1 Ceda, is so low. But they're here in worthy investment because they have very good weapon level, very good speed, very good luck, and pretty good skill as well. FE1 Ceda, I know, can use Silver Lances at base. FE3 either can use them at base or only needs 1 or 2 weapon levels to use them. So she'll be using better weapons than everyone else. And then by the time that everyone else catches up to her in weapon levels and those weapons become more common, particularly start showing up in enemy hands, then you're getting close to, or you've gotten, the first whip, which she will probably be the only Pegasus Knight at the level to use it if you've been training her by the time you get it. So she promotes, gets like 5 extra strength, 4 or 5 strength from the Wyvern promotion, and a couple points of defense, and that really solves most of her combat issues because she will probably have maxed speed and luck and maybe close to max skill, and obviously max weapon level that you, as far as you would need anyway by that point. And then you have the FE7 flyers, Fiora and Farina. Now, this might be a hot take, but I think Farina is by far the best Pegasus Knight in FE7, though the cost of getting her onto your team is significant. At first, I had both of these down at passable combat, but I didn't want to do that because I wanted the tier list to fit a little bit nicer on my OBS display. So I wanted to try and limit how many rows that I had, so I brought them up in order to even that out. Fiora joins just before Dragon's Gate. She's that classic kind of stereotypical middling Pegasus Knight that has a little bit more bulk than some of the others do, like Tana, but still kind of struggles to perform meaningfully well in combat without a few levels. Once you give her those levels, she still has to be a little bit lucky because she only has like a 35% strength growth and her strength is kind of subpar, but she can become a surprisingly bulky Pegasus Knight. Like, I find that she feels more bulky than she feels glass cannon-y, which is weird for a Pegasus Knight. She's not to the level of bulk as a Wyvern by any means, but I don't know, maybe it's just a feeling that I have when using her. Just kind of feels a little bit weird, like a weird unit. Maybe that's also because she joins with like a short spear and an axe slayer. Not axe slayer, axe reaver. So there is that. Sorry, I was falling down on my chair. Farina, meanwhile, joins with fantastic stats, great growths, pretty much everything you could want in a Pegasus Knight. The only problem is that she joins quite late, only as in Hector mode, and costs you 10,000 gold to recruit her. She also has a built-in training arc against the monks, as I displayed in the on-screen text in my Unit Design 101, where aside from the monks that roll 7 or 8 on speed, she doubles them with a javelin, doubles and 1 rounds. And the monks that do roll higher on speed, she can double in 1 round with any lighter of a weapon. So like an Iron Lance, definitely. She just doesn't do it on enemy phase because they have extra range on her. Honestly, quite solid unit. Criminally underrated solely because of the 10,000 gold cost to recruit her, I feel at least. Though I will honestly say that, you know, there are reasons why she shows up later and lower in tier lists, but this being slightly non-standard, as I'm tiering based on other factors than just A, B, C, D, F. It's my tier list. I can say she's a worthy investment because I genuinely think she is. She is worth the money you put into her, including the money that costs to buy her as a unit. The only caveat literally is the money that it takes to buy her and the fact that she joins later. And so you might already have units that are well trained and beyond her. But she doesn't take a lot of training to come to speed at that point. It also just is a matter of, well, this late in the game, how useful is flying utility to you on the last few maps? I think there are still plenty of maps in FE7 that heavily benefit from having strong flyers. If you've never played like Sonia's Water Temple without a lot of strong flyers, and then you've played it with strong flyers, feel the difference there. But that's just me, and we should probably move on to Passable combat. Here I have Aranis, who is in Passable because she does have a slow start, and by the time she really starts pulling into her own, she has to use tools like the Brave Lance, or after promotion, the Brave Sword. To get that combat, I still think that, like, Chapter 4, she should, if not be promoted, close to promotion. Brave weapons will push her over the edge quite well, and she's very good there. But also the enemy quality that you're fighting is lesser, and you have stronger units in the forms of Sigurd and, after Chapter 4, Lewin, and a number of others that can carry that combat for you. You don't necessarily need Aranis for that. And so, you know, she's passable combat-wise. I don't think she's like, oh, you have to invest in her and she makes the game so much easier. There are enough no-fly zones in FE4, particularly in Part 1, that it does detrimentally affect her to the point where I don't think that she provides as much unique utility or uniquely good combat as some of these other units. Misha, I think it's Misha. FE5 Misha is a weird case because she joins after most of the... First of all, she's only an A route, and she has a fairly restrictive... not restrictive... fairly convoluted recruitment. But I'm not holding that against her, per se, because, you know, she is passable combat. She is only okay physically, and her flying utility is a little bit limited with how many maps she has left and what maps you have left for her. But her magic is very high, making her one of the best magic sword users in the game. It starts at like 12 or 13 in a game with caps of 20. So, easily one of the best magic sword users in the game. One of, maybe not the best, but like one of. And just kind of out of the box with that, with good speed and great magic. I still have to put her in passable combat because of how late she joins, and because that's kind of is her only trick. But yeah, that's where I say I still think she's passable. She's better than filler, which a lot of late Pegasus Knights, as you'll see, are in filler. I also have, so this is FE1, Palla and Katria are passable combat. I say they're only passable because they join with pretty low stats. Their growths are high, but so are like most of your army in FE1. You only have a couple of maps before you get your first whip, and at that point, if you are using that first whip on anyone, you're probably using it on Ceda, unless she died or you just didn't train her. I think Katria is level 5 and Palla is level 8, but Palla is kind of only okay. Katria is better growth-wise by a significant margin, but her base stats are pretty poor. Either way, both Palla and Katria do struggle to fight multiple enemies on enemy phase. Do struggle just to survive kind of on the front lines. They have that squishy Pegasus Knight flyer thing down to a T, as it were. And by this point, you're having a lot more indoor maps where, sure, you don't have to dismount in FE1, but they are more limited in what they can do combat-wise, where they can go. Their flyer utility matters less. So I think they are above Est, mostly because they have, like, 2 of the better flyer maps over Est. Est does not show up in the Return to Altia or in the, like, she joins towards the, like, basically at the end of the Sable Order think it's called Sable Order. The one right before the Fane of Herman. So because of that, because of having those two maps, which are outdoor and have a lot of water for them to fly over, I do give them passable combat, where I only gave FE1 Est filler. So that's kind of where we're at. Also, same thing for Shadow Dragon, Pala, and Katria. They don't have any unique weapons. They join with reasonable weapon ranks and, you know, kind of subpar stats. So they're passable. They can be given effective weaponry and use it pretty well, but why would you? I've put Tsubaki in passable combat as well, much to the chagrin of a lot of people who say that he's like the worst unit in Fates, because honestly his combat is passable. I think he's definitely the low end of passable combat. Like, I'll do that for you. I think he's definitely one of the weaker combat units you have, but he's still passable. He's still workable. He's still usable. This is Birthright and Revelations we're talking about. It's not like he's in Conquest, where the stat differences actually matter that much. I don't think he's great. Obviously, he's not a worthy investment, unlike all Awakening units. I don't think he's that great. I think Kildori, his daughter, is definitely better than him. But I think he's still a passable unit and can be used in some combat, primarily early on, but even if you invest into him, he'll still be like, you know, he won't be great, but he'll be fine. Reyna, I also have in passable combat, mostly because her combat utility is a little more limited, but she is much better at it. And that is against other flyers. Having air superiority, basically at base. Is it at base? One sec, what level does she join at? Gonna double check this to make sure I'm not outright spouting lies. Okay, no, she joins at level 1. So she does take a couple levels to get air superiority. But she is the easiest unit to give air superiority, being a Kinshi Knight pre-promote. For a pre-promote, her stats are a little bit lackluster, but I don't say they're bad. I think Reyna, again, she's fine. She's perfectly playable. She's perfectly usable. When does she join in Revelations? Chapter 11? Oh, Chapter 11 in both of them. Cool. Yeah, no, she's fine. She's a pre-promote, so she has that going for her. I think if she wasn't a pre-promote and had lower base stats, she definitely would suffer more, because her growths are not bad, but they're not particularly... Like, her speed is quite good, but, like, speed's quite good, strength's pretty good. I don't know, I still feel like putting her into worthy investment, I feel like she's a little bit worse than those other units. Maybe she does deserve to be, like, at the top of passable combat. I have a hard time rating her because she kind of feels like if you get her air superiority, she dominates other flyers. But outside of that, she's kind of only okay against everything else she's fighting. And then we have Tate, or Thea, I think, on some translations. Honestly, Tate is barely in passable combat. Her combat is arguably not passable at all, even, like, among how the other units are. I think her combat can be argued is better than Shanna, unless Shanna specifically goes through a good amount of early training. And actually, we'll talk about Shanna while we talk about Tate, because I think they're similar units. I honestly think this is one of those cases, and this might seem weird on the tier list because it's ordered vertically, but this is one of those cases where I think Shanna is a better unit, even though Tate has better combat. Because Tate's combat is only arguably better, is definitely worse if you have Shanna, a dedicated training arc, and her early promotion. But I also think that her utility is significantly worse than Shanna's, because Shanna has several more maps where her utility matters, and then Tate kind of comes along towards the end of the Western Isles, and by that point it's like, yeah, she has utility, but Shanna has the same utility, if not slightly better, and has been with you for like 10 more chapters, okay, like 8 more chapters. Honestly, I think Tate is one of the worst units that are not totally filler, but a lot of times she does really feel like filler. Speaking of units that are better than filler, utility or niche combat I put here because initially it was just primarily utility, and then I figured, well, some of these units, their utility is their combat effectiveness against a particular type of unit, and so niche combat is what I'd call that, because it's not necessarily utility, because utility implies non-combat. Here we are. Karen, first of all, fantastic utility. Whether it's her utility of being a light enough unit to capture trick enemies that doesn't involve potentially losing your lockpick from Lara, or whether it involves her becoming a flyer and having a surprisingly high, I say high, it's like 3% movement growth. Maybe it's not 3%, maybe it's more than that. I don't know, my Karen, when I played Thracia, got to like 11 move by the end of the game. It was absurd. She still couldn't actually kill stuff, but she could move from outside of Alyssa's range to attacking it in melee in a single turn, in a single move. Her movement's great, flying utility is great. She's one of only a handful of flyers you get, and the other flyers you get like halfway through the game just about, so she's your only flyer for the majority of it, and does a lot of very important flyer things. She has a lot of speed, and that's kind of it. Her other stats are kind of mediocre, though you can patch anyone's stats up with enough scrolls, because it's Thracia. Definitely good utility, showcases what flyers can do in Thracia, even if her combat is not super good, but that's less important because this is Thracia, and you have combat units that are dedicated to combat, and you have more utility units that don't need to be good at combat, they just need to be okay enough, and she's okay enough. Shanna, again, I've talked about her when I talked about Thea or Tate, is that she has worse combat unless you specifically go out of your way to level her up and then give her that early Elysian Whip and promote her in like chapter 8 or 9. She's fine combat then, like at that point she's passable combat. She's not gonna really surpass and surprise anyone, particularly when it comes to towards the late game where combat means so much more in FE6. But she still has a lot of good flyer utility. Her low con means she can carry pretty much anyone. There's like a couple of units, I think, that she can't. But basically the vast majority of units you'll be using she can carry. I think it's like Barth that she can't. Or maybe it's if there's anyone that can carry Barth, it's unpromoted Shanna. I forget how that goes. I know that that's the case with Florina, who's the next on the list. But yeah, so Shanna is primarily should be thought of as a utility flyer, and only secondarily combat, and even then her combat is pretty shaky. Mostly on hard mode. On normal mode her combat's fine. It's passable, it's fine. Florina, a lot of people are going to be looking at this list and argue that Florina should be on carry and training. Well, I'm sorry. If you play Lin mode and give her the Seraph Robe and Energy Ring from Lin mode, then yes, she is carry and training because you basically have given her plus 7 HP and plus 2 strength on her bases, and HP and strength is what she is most lacking in by far. If you don't play Lin mode, or if you play Lin mode but don't give her those boosters, she is pretty much just a utility flyer. She can become pretty okay in combat, like anyone in FE7 can. She can get ahead, she can fight a lot, she can probably become close to on par to Fiora, but she just takes a lot more effort to get there because her bases coming in on Eliwood or Hector mode are so much worse. Even though she gets that couple of extra early chapters of training, it still is just not enough because those chapters are not good enough for actually leveling her. Too much risk to send her out on her own, and really can't survive much enemy phase combat. And there's just too many archers in FE7. Sure, they're only double effectiveness, but they still two-shot her, if not one-shotting, because her HP and defense, again, are super low. Sorry if you're hearing a click, my armrest is clicking a lot. Let me try to fix that while I talk about Gaiden Est. Now, I feel some days like I'm the biggest defender of Gaiden Est there is. I think that Gaiden Est and SOV Est are actually fantastic units, mostly because they have like 15 resistance, which is head and shoulders above any other unit. Like, I think the next best resistance unit is either 12 or 15 that she has, because it's like the second highest resistance of any playable unit, the only one higher being not Titania, Ceda slash, is it Titania or is it Tatiana? Because Titania is the Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn Paladin. Tatiana, I think, has 18 as a pre-promoted Saint, whereas Ests has, I think, 15 just as a base Pegasus Knight. And 15 resistance is massive in a game that basically doesn't have a resistance growth. Like, it has a resistance stat, but basically not a resistance growth. So it's like, this is one of the reasons why Matilda is considered so much better, because Matilda has very, very good resistance for a paladin. She has like 9 resistance. I think Catria has 12 and Est has 15. I could be wrong on that. Let me actually look this up so I'm not just full of garbage here. Okay, in Gaiden, she has 12 resistance. In SOV, she has 12 resistance. Okay, Catria. Okay, so I was wrong technically in that. Catria has 9 resistance. Okay, so how much resistance does Tatiana have? Okay, it is 18 resistance. Okay, so yeah, 12 resistance compared to the 18 of Tatiana, but that's still good. And then, yeah, Matilda has 10 resistance. Still fantastic. 12 resistance is the highest of any physical unit, and she actually has, if I remember right, her resistance growth is non-zero. Like, it's not big by any means, but it's non-zero. Yeah, 3%. I guess everyone has stupidly low resistance growth. Why am I talking about resistance growth? Anyway, needless to say, she comes in at the end of Chapter 3, basically. She is underleveled, she is weak, she is passable. She's basically like what Catria and Palla are at base, which is similar to how she shows up in FE1 and FE3. She's similar to how they show up at base, but several maps after, which makes her seem so much worse because the enemies have gotten a fair amount stronger, and so she's going to take some dedicated training, more active attention and dedicated training to level her up. However, because her resistance is so much better, she actually is significantly better at fighting mages than either Catria or especially Palla. Like, Catria is good at fighting mages with 9 resistance. Palla has like 5 or 6 resistance. It's like basically the same as another. I'm just gonna look this up right now because I've been wrong enough. Yeah, 5 resistance on Palla. Palla actually suffers against mages a fair bit because mages have really good damage in Gaiden and SOV. Catria doesn't suffer as much. She's pretty good. Est rocks against mages, and once she promotes, her, she absolutely destroys monsters just like everyone else. And what are the biggest things you fight in Chapter 4? Mages and monsters. Also, she enables the triangle attack, which in SOV feels like it matters less because it is a combat art that you have to use. It's only one attack. It's a vastly increased crit chance, but is not a guaranteed crit, and is not a guaranteed hit at all. In Gaiden, the triangle attack is basically the only guaranteed way, or somewhat guaranteed way, to kill Ceda properly, with his every 4 attacks or every 4 turns shield, depending on which version you're playing. So, triangle attack, very good. Est, required for that. Very good resistance, allows her to tank mages and kind of just ignore them. Once you get her to promotion, which only takes a couple levels, fantastic against monsters. Still would rate her worse than Catria and Palla, just because Catria and Palla have almost the entirety of Chapter 3 in order to train, while she just has the tail end of Chapter 3 going into Chapter 4, so you kind of have to go a little bit out of your way and fight a grinding map or two in order to level her. But she does give a very good return on that investment. I debated whether to put her into worthy investment because I think that, kind of like Farina, she's just seriously underrated because of how late she joins. But I will put her in utility or niche combat just because she's not as necessary. I guess technically none of them are necessary. I don't know. I'm putting her under utility or niche combat just because it kind of made sense, where she's only really good at fighting monsters or mages. Well, only really good at fighting mages before promotion. And then, I mean, she can fight anyone, but you're primarily fighting monsters and mages in Celica's route anyway, so she's honestly just good. Maybe I will. I will put her under a worthy investment. Sue me. I think she's worth it. I think it does take actual investment, whereas maybe that's the reason why I put her down lower, is because you have to go out of your way to train her, whereas these other units you don't have to go out of your way as much to train. Yeah, I think that is where I stand. Hence why they're a little bit lower here. But yeah, that's where it is. But I still think that is definitely better than New Mystery Ceda, who once again comes in with her absolutely terrible strength growth. It's slightly better than the 20% it was at before, but the enemy variety is significantly better. She has good weapon ranks, but, you know, so she can hold an effective weapon, a forged dragon pike or a forged wing spear, and fly around with high mobility in maps that are really rude otherwise, like Henri's Way, and one shot on player phase. And then that's kind of it. She's a utility unit in that sense. She's a niche combat unit. I'm not going to say that she's fantastic because she's not really doing anything to units that she's not effective against. Her stats are nowhere near what's required of FE12 standards, particularly in higher difficulties. But she does have that effective damage ability. I also have... I cannot remember her name. This is the Emmy? I want to say Emmy. Shadows of Valentia DLC. Emma. Okay. Yes, Emma is pretty mid. Emma basically is budget Est. Or not budget Est. Emma is pay-to-win Est that actually doesn't win as much as you would expect. Her stats and growths are just slightly worse than Est's. The only benefit she has is that if you have the DLC, you can get her, I believe, before you can get Est. So in that way, she's probably fine. Pretty much nobody has her because the DLC cost more than the game itself. And the only, I guess, utility she brings per se through her Trainee's Lance is that the Trainee's Lance teaches the solo triangle attack skill, which is a combat art that allows you to attack 3 times in a row. However, that is not unique to her, that is unique to her Lance. So her Lance is the powerful thing, not her. She ends up then being a pay-to-be-the-same version of Est, which is still not bad by any means. I consider her probably fine, but I think, you know, Trainee's Lance is not hers. It is the Lance that is the better thing about her. She's just kind of a pretty okay Pegasus Knight. I guess her 10% resistance growth is absurdly good for Echo's standards, whereas, you know, most units are like 1 to 3%. Maybe she has that going for her. Radiant Dawn Marcia, oh how the mighty have fallen. She is just not available enough to really make a difference. She's in a handful of maps, and she's important as flying utility in those maps. If you want to get some hidden items or whatnot in the map where you have a lot of cavalry and you have to jump up and down ledges, which cavalry can't do, she's important there. But really, really struggles there. And Hermina, I said I'd talk about Hermina when I was talking about Fee, because Hermina does not have Pursuit. So Ermita's combat is just bad. She doesn't have Pursuit, she has Adept, which she would have gotten on promotion anyway. She doesn't get Inheritance. Her starting inventory is fine. It's like the Berserk Edge and a Javelin. So, you know, Pegasus Knight starting wise. Stat wise, she can be okay. This is Genealogy. You can level people up to absurd heights and just kind of throw them at people. But you can't really throw her around, so she's primarily going to be used to fly around and snipe off, like, barbarians that are attacking villages, or try and help out, help out the, I forget who it is, the civilians or whatever who are fleeing that you need to rescue in order to get, Tyrfing. Yeah, she can do some good stuff, some important stuff as a flyer, but it really is just, again, a utility flyer's role because her combat without Pursuit is not good. She has speed and not a ton of strength, and can't make use of her speed because she can't double units. Not a good combat unit. Then we have the filler tier. I'm going to try to just speed through these because, you know, not super interesting. Tanith and Sigrun are, in Radiant Dawn, probably the easiest free tier 3 units that you'll get. You get them at the very end of part 3. Or heck, maybe you get them in part 4, actually. Actually, yeah, no, you get them in part 4. You get them in part 4 because they're... Was it part 4 or part 3? Either way, you either get them at the very end of part 3 or you get them at the start of part 4. They are with Sanaki, and so they are in the desert. And being flyers in the desert is very good because the desert is big and slows everyone else's units, every landlocked unit who's not a dedicated mage, to like 2 squares. Maybe 3. Maybe a little bit more if they're a transformed Lagoose. So being a flyer in the desert is very good. Their combat is only so-so. They can shrug off long-range tomes pretty well. That's pretty good. If they encounter an archer or, heaven forbid, a crossbow, they will disappear. Honestly, they're pretty good. They're not really strong enough to bring into the tower unless you really like them and really want to invest a lot into them once they've promoted. Again, they're really easy to get to promotion. Unless you're playing in the JP version, which you'd have to use a Master Crown on them, and they're probably not worth that. Just fine all around. They're filler. Look, they're not unusable. They're filler. Claire in Gaiden and SOV. I rate SOV... They're similar. You don't fight enough monsters in Alm's Route to really make them good. Like, the most monsters you fight are in the Necrodragon Valley, the volcano. And you can kind of bypass most of those encounters if you just do Celica's maps first. And then beyond that, it's like, okay, there's a couple of people that spam, like, skeletons and gargoyles. But mostly you'll be fighting a lot of human soldiers, and Pegasus Knights in Gaiden and SOV are not fantastic against human soldiers, particularly with the amount of bow knights that exist. Now, archers only deal bonus damage if they are equipped with a special bow. Like, if they're equipped with a bow weapon, then they can do bonus damage, but otherwise they don't because the bow weapon they have has a base might of 0, so... 0 times 3 is still 0. But notably on Shadows of Valentia hard mode, Claire is very limited by this because you fight a lot of enemies that have iron or steel bows. Particularly in part 4 when you just have a lot of bow knights that you're fighting. The maps are not super great for flyers. Like, she can fly around and do some stuff that other units can't. Still kind of mediocre. And her combat is just bad. Like, even promoting doesn't fix her combat, because again, there's not enough monsters to really have her excel at, and the Falconite base stats, without accounting for Slayer, are not that great. She'll be doubling, and it's like, okay, she'll only kill if you give her a highly forged weapon, at which point you could have given that to any of your other Cavaliers, or Barons, or whoever else that you're using, and have them kill as well. So always will also kind of be frail, particularly with how many human units. And even if the archers aren't dealing effective damage to her, they still can attack her at massive range, so she can't really hide anywhere, like over mountains or rivers. Yeah, just kind of feels like a filler unit, which is really sad because I love her design, especially in SOV, but just unfortunate case of SOV, but SOV flyer, but there are no monsters for you to fight, and your resistance is not actually super fantastic. It's passable, but again, Matilda has better. Juno and Cyrene are the epitome of like late game filler flyers. Their utility is pretty meh because they have higher constitution, so they can't carry as many units. Their combat is meh because they're pre-promoted and they're given pretty low stats, so they fight about as well as like a base level Tana would fight in Chapter 9, is how well Cyrene fights. Juno fights a little bit better than like a base level Tate fought in Chapter like 12, but only a little bit. So it's like they're usable, they're filler. They're not unusable. Again, that's like I don't think any of these flyers are completely unusable, but filler is probably the worst case for a Pegasus Knight, and I think that's where they land. And then you have other Ests, non-SOV Gaiden Ests, where in FE1 she has like 50 to 70% growth in most things outside of defense. Her growths are good, her base level is not. There are too many other flyers competing for the one whip that you get right after she joins and several chapters later afterwards. Katria and Pala actually join with a couple maps that are good for flyers that she doesn't get to play on, in which case she only has a handful of maps to actually fight on and use her flyer utility. But in those maps you're fighting against a lot of enemy Wyverns, and enemy Wyverns are, well, they're pre-promoted Pegasus Knights in Ests and Arcanea games. So they have a lot more defense, they have a lot more strength. She might outspeed them, but she's not doing much damage and she's taking a lot in return. Just filler, honestly. And it doesn't get much better in Book 3. She takes Zane's place in the prison and then is super weak again there. Again, she joins, but you're fighting against mostly pre-promoted units. Her growths are good, but they're not that good. She's just kind of a mid unit overall. And then Shadow Dragon and New Mystery, it's more of the same, but enemy quality is better, and she's not gotten any better. She can hold effective weaponry and do that stuff, sure, but you have, by that point, several other units that can do that. So the best thing that she gives when she joins is just the extra the extra flyer slot in your reclass menu. So you get Est, and then instead of using her as a flyer, you just change her to something else and change another unit so you can get a 5th Draco Knight. That's how you use Est. That's what Est gives you. But anyway, that's the tier list. I am starting to get a headache, so excuse me if I've been like accidentally touching the microphone or whatnot, or if I've gotten extra rambly. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all y'all. If you like tier lists, go to the community section. Currently there is, if you're watching this video when it goes live, there is currently a Radiant Dawn community tier list. We are voting on it 1 unit every day, and once all the units are voted on, I will assemble them into a tier list and throw it out the door, and then we all get to laugh or cry or cheer at whatever you, the viewers, voted on. So get out and vote on those units. Again, 1 unit every day, but you can still vote on the old units until the tier list is finalized. So once the last unit joins and we cover that and I make the video, that's when the tier list voting stops. Up until that point, go, share your voice. Till next time, let me know if you have any other ideas for Unit Design 101 or other Design 101s you want to see me cover in the comments. Let me know if you have any other questions about Pegasus Knights, either in the comments or in Discord. The link is in the description. And until then, this is Mithril Zenith signing out. Hello, Mithril Zenith here, just saying I forgot somehow Hinoka and Shigure. So let's talk about Hinoka and Shigure while I hastily edit this into the video and hopefully put them there and you won't notice them not being there. Hinoka, very solid, very good. Definitely a lot better than Tsubaki, which fantastic. Good for you. You're better than a filler unit. Oh, technically not a filler, a passable combat unit. Honestly, pretty good. Not super overwhelming. I would probably put her under worthy investment. Some people might just put her under passable combat, but she's definitely better than Tsubaki, so I'll put her up there. She has pretty good stats. Being a noble helps in Revelation when there are so many Dragon Veins to use. And yeah, honestly, just pretty well rounded, pretty good overall. Shigure has a very interesting role as being kind of set up to be a support, like a rally flyer. Though, depending on parentage, again, you can make him pretty broken, do whatever you want, because it's just Azura who's he's linked to. So you can pair her up with pretty much whatever and get a good built-in sibling with some good stats and some good options there. Um, so yeah, I'll put both of them in worthy investment because I think that they kind of fulfill that same sort of awakening type of you can do whatever you want to with this unit and they'll turn out pretty okay. Yeah, so hopefully that's fine. Sorry about that. I also forgot to shout out the channel members. I'm doing great today. So huge thank you so much to Royal Laguzguard member Salmelon and the Laguzguard tier members C2 Piccoli, Enigmatic Mr. L, Mad Moke, Pro Duderman, Kumi, Miss Mesmerism, Lakag, and Relaz 6. Again, sorry for forgetting that. You all have a fantastic day, and once again, this is Mythos Zenith signing out. Hopefully for real this time.